Jonathan Dekel-Chen, welcome to Jerusalem Dateline.
Thank you for having me.
So you're the father of Sagui Dekel-Chen. He was 498 days in captivity. How did it feel to be the father of someone that was a Hamas hostage?
Well, there's the before and after. It was a living hell every day from October 7th, 2023 until February 14th when he was finally released. And since then, it's like having a newborn 36-year-old son who had his, launch on that day and now is a little under 4 weeks old. It's a crazy concept, but that's how I'm experiencing it.
And I bet you still want to hold him in your arms, right?
I barely let him out of my sight.
Yes.
But I compete with his wife and 3 little girls.
Yeah, I bet. So how did you go through those 16 months?
Well, I think like many other hostage parents, hostage families, wake up every morning and try and figure out what's the best thing that I can do to help get Sagui freed. And that also held true in my case for all of the many hostages who are from our kibbutz, from Kibbutz Nir Oz, where there's still, of the total 59 hostages being held by Hamas, 14 of them are from my kibbutz, from our very small community along the border. 79 were taken hostage from Kibbutz Nir Oz out of the initial 240 hostages who were taken by Hamas and other terrorist groups. So there's been a vast disproportion of hostages being held in Gaza from my kibbutz home, which for anyone who's familiar with the kibbutz, certainly a smallish one, on the periphery, these are all members of my extended family.
Yeah, so that was like a third of the hostages were from your kibbutz.
Between a quarter and a third of all the total hostages were from our very small community. Kibbutz Nir Oz was ground zero for the massacre on October 7th and the hostage taking.
Can you tell us what happened to Sagui on that day?
Well, along with 78 other people from our kibbutz, some of them Thai workers actually, Sagui was taken hostage. He had been wounded during the course of that day. He arrived in Khan Yunis, in the Gaza town right across the border, at around noontime. From there, he was taken to a hospital in Khan Yunis where his wounds were initially treated. Within a couple of months, he found himself in the Hamas terror tunnels and was there for the duration of the 498 days that he was in captivity.
Has he told you anything about that time? Has he been able to share those things?
For the duration of those 498 days, he saw no sunlight. That alone to the human body takes a toll. There was very little, if any, medical care given. And we know that there are even people from our kibbutz who died as a result of lack of proper medical care. Constant malnutrition, if not starvation. And we saw that on many of the hostages who were released in the first round of the negotiated agreement, who came out looking like Holocaust survivors. We add to that horrific sanitary conditions in the tunnels, sort of things better left unimagined. And perhaps most importantly, the fear of death at any moment. Sagui figured out that the 498 days that he was in captivity equates to 43 million seconds. And he felt every one of them. And the danger of death came from 2 directions. The obvious one, and the most immediate, was from his Hamas captors. And we know from other cases that Hamas captors at some point and for some reason executed hostages. And that was always a possibility. But what is no less important is death from friendly fire. Sagui told us, as many of the other released hostages have told us, that he had near-death experiences in the tunnels from Israeli bombing and artillery fire. We know for sure that the IDF and the Israeli Air Force did what they could to avoid bombing locations where they thought hostages might be located. But war is war, and things happen. And so the urgency of getting all the hostages home comes from their experience. This is not imaginary. These are not tales told by relatives who are in Israel or somewhere else about what might be happening. in the tunnels under Gaza, and why they are so adamant to get the remaining hostages out.
We interviewed you right near the beginning, after Sagui was kidnapped, and I think you didn't even know his condition at that point. When did you find out that he was indeed in Gaza and alive?
The first positive proof of life that we got came in late November, early December. As you might recall, there was a first negotiated agreement between Israel and Hamas, brokered by the United States, Qatar, and Egypt, and about 104 hostages of the total 240 were released. Of those 100, about 40 were from our kibbutz, women and children. And a handful of the women and a couple of the teenagers had encountered Sagui in the tunnels a few days before they were released. And they could tell us at that point, once they were home, that Sagui was alive and that he was wounded. He was wounded in his shoulder and in his leg. So from that point, we were thrilled to hear that because we knew nothing before. So we're talking early December 2023. We didn't have a positive proof of life until he walked out on his own 2 feet of that Hamas minivan at the meeting point where the Red Cross picked them up in Khan Yunis on February 14th.
When he came out, what were your first thoughts?
Well, there was a lot of concern beforehand. It was a very difficult week leading up to that Saturday release of 3 hostages. Thankfully, through the intervention of President Trump's team, that release did happen. But what we didn't know was whether he could walk on his own 2 feet. We had no idea what he going to look like. So once he emerged and went to that just horrific, inhumane ceremony that Hamas has staged for the handover to the Red Cross, at that point, we saw that he was able to walk, but it was hard to really get a full feeling of, was he okay? What man had just emerged? We had to wait another hour or 2 until he was transferred to Israel and came to us in a military base quite close to the border. And once I laid eyes on him, even before I could hold him, I knew that that was my son. He didn't have to speak. Sagui, since he was a little boy, speaks with his eyes. And once I saw his eyes, I knew that that was him, that there may be all sorts of challenges, and God only knows what he experienced in that year and a half in Hamas terror tunnels, but it was him, and it was going to be okay.
I mean, we all watched him hug his wife and his little girls. How are they doing now? How are they managing?
Look, Sagui was always there for his wife and certainly 2 older daughters. He was with them constantly in their thoughts and their daily routines. Avital, his wife, has told of how Sagui was with her in her dream world every single night. So the renewal of the relationship was actually immediate. He's now having to build a relationship with his youngest daughter, who was born 2 months after the massacre on Nir Oz. His wife was 7 months pregnant at the time and miraculously survived the massacre with her 2 little girls in a bomb shelter in their home. Their family is whole again. Yeah, it takes some getting used to, I'm sure, for the girls to have dad back and all that that means. But it's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, is to see how they have just embraced each other. And that even having emerged from the valley of death, which is where Sagui and all of the hostages have been, and many still are, that there is hope that they can re-engage in their lives if we're not too late.
Now, Sagui's arm, we can see he's not really using it. Is he going to have surgery?
Yeah, it's going to be a process with his arm. He sustained heavy damage, and so a year and a half later, the Israeli doctors are going to have to figure out how to repair a shoulder that sustained serious injury and has, really created a situation where his right arm needs a lot of work.
Less than 2 weeks after Sagui was released, we all saw on social media this beautiful song him singing. We were like, how could he even do that? That was amazing. But he's a musical guy, right?
He's not a musician, but a musical guy, for sure.
How did that come about?
While in captivity, he surrounded himself in his own mind with music. And music had always been a big part of his life. He wrote a number of songs that will be actually performed at some point. They're now being put to music, and at some point he will be performing them. And so he had an urge to give hope to Israelis who support the cause of the hostages, which is well over 80% of our population in Israel, and to somehow perhaps give hope to those hostages who he left behind. In terms of the sort of the nitty-gritty, it wasn't that hard to put together because Sagui and I and his older brother and a wonderful young woman named Tamar Kedem Simantov, in 2014, we created together a national village for the arts in Israel, a residential boarding school whose purpose was to offer and provide to highly talented, highly motivated high school age kids in Israel from the vast part of the Israeli population who are to get a really great arts education. And the musicians that you see playing with him and singing are all alumni of that school. And is the way that Sagui is communicating his message is going to be more through art than sort of straightforward media or things like that.
Right, and he was also a guest, I think, at his favorite soccer team's game, met the team.
Yeah, the people of Israel have been extraordinarily embracing of hostages and hostage families. It's really been a moving experience for me. Sagui and Avital were given an amazing welcome by the Hapoel Be'er Sheva soccer team, which is actually really good, at a home game. It was very, very moving for them.
What's the hardest thing for Sagui at this point? What are his biggest challenges?
Hands down is the knowledge that there are still 59 hostages, amongst them young fathers. That for him is the biggest single priority. Doing what he can from where he's at right now to bring home the message to the Israeli government and to all other parties that it has to happen now, and he is living proof of that.
What's the next step for him after that?
For Sagui, there's a recovery and rehabilitation process that he's going to have to go through that's going to take some time. For us, it's hard to know. Us, I mean the people of Nir Oz. On October 7th, that day, I believe the number is 47 of our small community, a little over 400. 47 were murdered, 79 taken captive, others murdered in captivity. Our homes completely destroyed. Kibbutz Nir Oz is uninhabitable and will perhaps be rebuilt and re-inhabited, I'm not quite sure by whom. But we can't even begin the mourning process and the recovery process until those 14 people are back home amongst the 59. Of the surviving community, about half of the community wants to go back to the reestablished Kibbutz Nir Oz. 30+% as a community, and this is mostly the young families, want to go together to live in a different kibbutz that's not across the border from Gaza. And another 15% of the people of Nir Oz are going to choose other pathways in the future that will be unconnected. My kids, Nir Oz was their life. They grew up there. They were raising their own children, my grandkids there. But Nir Oz became a killing field on October 7th. Their childhood friends, the children of their childhood friends, the adults that they had grown up with, all these kinds of people were murdered on Nir Oz, in some cases right before their eyes.
How has this whole traumatic experience, how has it changed you?
We've been embraced by the vast majority of Israelis in the diaspora and by certainly Christian communities everywhere I've gone. And I've traveled a lot over the last 16 months. We can't explain the little miracles that happened within that life-changing experience, an unspeakably tragic experience, other than something that's more faith-based Because why did the killing stop? As a simple example, the terrorists and the looters left about an hour before the first soldier arrived on the kibbutz, or 40 minutes, I believe is the exact number. Had they stayed longer, they would have killed more and raped more and looted more and kidnapped more. We have no idea how Sagui survived, not knowing if his wife and daughters were alive. He had no idea until 2 days before he was released. So 496 days, he doesn't know if anyone from Nir Oz had survived, other than the people who were hostages with him.
What's your message to the world at this point?
The message is, first of all, thank you to President Trump. Without his intervention in this crisis, from about 2 days after he was elected, I do not believe that we would have gotten this far. He and his team have been instrumental in moving all the parties, which means, of course, Hamas, the intermediaries, Egypt and Qatar, and the Israeli government to yes.
And how can people pray?
If I can suggest, for the welfare of the hostages and to bolster the spirits of their families and loved ones who are just desperate to get them home, but also pray on behalf of sort of the firmness and the vision of the leaders to bring this home.
What do you think needs to happen in Gaza?
There will never be peace in our region, perhaps beyond, as long as Hamas or a Hamas-like organization continues to rule. Through the world community, its generosity and its seriousness about creating a post-Hamas Gaza, these people have to be given, the millions who live there, they're not going anywhere. So the millions who live there have to be given something that they don't want to lose, something good that they don't want to lose. And maybe then we can all have a better future, because going back to what was serves no one.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.